Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leaf Collectivo podcast. With me today is Lawrence from the Mothership. Great to have you with us, Lawrence. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks, Gilbert.
Yeah, so today is all about how do you run brands profitable? How do you hit profitability? Lawrence is in a special kind of position because he's not just running one, he's running a portfolio of brands to profitability. And I think probably to set the scene and the context, I think it would be great to learn a little bit more about what the Mothership is, what it stands for, and really kind of like that vision that was set forward by the founders a few years ago. And yeah, and the amazing journey it has had, as with everything, a bit of a roller coaster, as you know,
Yeah,
as every
of
business.
course.
But I think it is great to hear from that. Yeah. So, Lawrence.
Yeah, of course. I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on what we do. So, the Mothership essentially buys and grows health and wellness brands. And what we mean by that is we provide we provide an exit to founders who built businesses at sort of kind of yeah, I guess 3 to 8 million of revenue. Sort of, they've got a bit of product market fit, but they maybe haven't scaled past that sort of 10 million mark. And we were built really to provide and create the best machine that could take those brands who have that kind of little piece of product market fit and really scale them to be the best version of what they could be. We really believe in taking brands to their full potential. And when we started the business, we really believed that due to the proliferation of eCom, people understand the rails that eCom runs on better and better. So whether that's Amazon, Shopify, Meta Ads, Google Ads, we could build really best-in-class resource in each of those rails to basically give those small brands that maybe are bootstrapped and they struggle to access that key expertise, access to those expertise and let them achieve that potential. And so when we founded the business, we really set about trying to find the best people that we could do to help us run. We run on kind of an Amazon market, Amazon and Shopify mix. So the business, we have 7 brands in our portfolio. 4 of them are kind of marketplace first brands, and 3 of them are D2C first brands. And so we wanted to find people who are best in class in each of those areas and disciplines and build an amazing platform for us to acquire and find great companies that we felt like had that spark, had something amazing that we could grow. And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and obviously, I think what is very interesting about the Mothership, like you said, is you have certain brands who are marketplace first, right? Like that actually have grown, from on the back of infrastructure like Amazon, right? And oftentimes making that jump between, especially for brands who started their journey through this marketplace and then making the jump direct to consumer, and vice versa, has its own challenges, right? And in many ways, they operate slightly different, and they're kind of like going in different directions in terms of the strengths and what they need to build. How has been that journey for you guys? Do you guys started with a mix of both? You started first on Amazon, or those marketplace ones first, or what was the thesis, and how does that thesis has evolved from the beginning?
So that's a great question. And I think if I take it back to when we founded the business in 2021, actually, we were really concentrated on the Amazon ecosystem. And I think those listening who remember the heady days of 2020 and 2021, there were a bunch of American companies that started buying up a lot of Amazon businesses. And the group of founders that we were, a lot of us, like most of us actually didn't come from an ecom background. We'd come from marketing background and entrepreneurial background in other digital, in other places of the digital ecosystem, but not in e-commerce. And so we saw this idea that Amazon essentially is a one-stop shop. You can kind of do everything there. And so if you bought lots of Amazon brands, you could kind of scale them all on the same style of work, and you can get all of these economies of scale. And I think that if anyone has followed the story of Amazon aggregation over that kind of 4-year period, you'll know that model really didn't work. And one of the reasons why it didn't work is people completely missed the fundamental points of what makes e-commerce brands win is an understanding of their customer, an understanding of their product, and an understanding of their supply chain, all of which aren't really about Amazon. So quite quickly in our journey, we realized this. And so when we started as Amazon, we bought our first 2 businesses, which were Amazon first. And by the second acquisition that we did, we had already kind of really stated an aim to become a multi-channel aggregator and a multi-channel holding company that could really focus on building long-term value. And how we see that is, yeah, okay, there's a profitability element, which we'll talk today, but we also think about repeat revenue, quality of brand, quality of kind of ownership of customer data, and diversification of risk, where previously, I think if you're just focus on one channel, and especially if that channel is a very expensive channel to run, and a very fickle channel like Amazon, you can be kind of opening yourself up to more risk than you maybe need to, and not really building for the long-term future of that business.
Yeah. Did you guys? Because something that struck me from your intro was the wellness bit. You know, I feel like that's new, right? Like,
Yeah.
as well, right? And probably going back to this, you know, 2020, 2021, you know, aggregation bit. I remember one of our portfolio brands at the time got acquired in a very rapid succession. I think they negotiated everything in like 2 weeks, and then like by week third, it's like, yeah, we're off. Like we just, and
Yeah.
it was very quickly, you know, like how, you know, like some of these aggregators were purchasing. It was all over the place, and like you talk to, you know, at the end of the day, some of these values will come from like those economies of scale. But these economies of scale work if, you know, you kind of like leveraging that scale in aggregate. But if you're aggregating, you know, children's stuff with wellness stuff, with this stuff, with that stuff, fashion, with, you know, like homeware and everything, then there is not such a thing as scale, because you still have, you know, a
Yeah.
myriad of different things that don't necessarily give you that scale.
All of this stuff seems so logical in hindsight, and yet somehow at the time we really didn't get that. So we started actually as a general thesis, and one of the logic for that was essentially, look, we kind of knew our own weaknesses, and we didn't come from an ecom background, so we didn't really know where we'd fit very well, and so we wanted to basically buy a couple of businesses and work out what we were good at, and you know, as sort of is clear, like we've evolved our thesis over time, and we kind of really come back to this understanding of like, what are we trying to build, you know? And I think when we started, it was sort of like, oh well, we had a kind of, it was quite vague, if I'm honest. It was sort of like, we're riding the wave, we're going to see what happens. And over time, we realized that the long-term investors and the strong theses in the market were really about understanding a deep understanding of what the core value drivers that you were going to create. And part of that was about an understanding of your customer and your audience. And so that's how we've ended up really focusing down into one sector, which is in health and wellness, and specifically understanding how to run really strong consumable businesses, especially in the kind of nutrition and supplement space, where we can get strong repeat revenue, where we can really understand the customer, where we can build moats around compliance, around product understanding, around formulation. And when you start to think about it that way, instead of it just being a hodgepodge of a lot of companies with economies of scale that are sort of a bit vague, suddenly you can say, okay, well, actually, there are things that are defensible about this. You can legitimately go to the market and say, we really understand product compliance, and that means you're going to be able to go into the US or into the EU faster than you would possibly otherwise. We really understand formulation, so we really understand how to expand your portfolio, and we really get the health and wellness customer. We know where to meet them. We know what they need. We know where the market, where their interests are going, and we can start to build new products or buy new brands accordingly to that thesis. And so as you think it through, it just becomes a lot more obvious. I just always think when I have this kind of conversation, I always look back and think, how did we kind of get it so? How did we look at it so differently back in the day? But I think that was also us responding to the market.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because I think similar to us, that didn't have any marketing background to begin with, right? I mean, we took a very engineering approach to it, and then as we start, you know, interacting with other, you know, partners in the market with similar offerings, and then you see how different they actually approach things, and you know, and then you go, right. So you know, probably that naiveness of not coming from that operator space also becomes a strength at some point, because then you're less attached to the status quo, and then you actually get to build your own status quo that oftentimes is a lot stronger, or ends up being a lot stronger than what it could have been if you guys would have brought that experience in the first place.
100%. I think that you mentioned at the beginning that there's been a real journey of the business, and I think actually when it comes to what we're talking about today in profitability, I think our real moment where we started to crack profitability on a group level was when we allowed ourselves a space to step back, think from first principles, and work out what we were actually trying to do. Um, you know, the thing that is difficult when you start buying companies is you go from not really doing anything to suddenly running a business that has a lot of fires all the time. And so it's actually quite difficult to step back from that and think about, okay, what are we here to do? So it took us, 2 years to really get to a place where we realized we had to rethink this and stop just trying to run the business as is, and instead think about what we're here to do, how we provide value, and how we as a group can fit the businesses we buy the best and create value in them.
And in doing that, I mean, we were talking earlier. I mean, Ben Fletcher, who's one of the founders of the Mothership, he also runs a series of events called the Fast Icons, and he always shares with the audience a little bit of that journey, and my conversations with him. It is also about making the tough decisions. Oftentimes, like you said, I mean, taking a step back, look at what you have in front of you, but then having the courage to make those decisions, especially when you have already invested a handful amount of money in some things, and being able to say, right, how do we realign, how do we take that step forward, and yeah, like, so going, probably taking that into account, what does profitability means for the Mothership? What does it mean? Obviously you run a group, right? Arguably you want all the brands to be profitable on their own right. They're all different, right? Like you said yourself, right? Even, the nature of their own business, is slightly different upfront. You also have different objectives for each one of them. How do you guys, take profitability? How do you guys look at it as a group, and then, then maybe we can drill down into a brand level?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's sort of it's relatively simple in the sense that we really are trying to operate a business that is delivering profit and cash on a group level every month, and we try and split that. And maybe we can talk about the brand level and how we think about splitting those profits and understanding where in. I think a big change for us has been really trying to create a system where we can identify where in our P&L we're seeing kind of over and under or within kind of standard deviation increases in spend or decreases in profit. But like, just to explain to people, the holding company model, right? We have 7 companies that are essentially 7 entities, and then we have a holding company group on top of that, which kind of holds all of our, I guess, our kind of centralized costs. So all of the profit that's generated from our 7 companies drops, and then we have a line which comes out, which is essentially our group operational expenses, and then after that is profit. So one of the challenges with buying companies is that if you start to buy companies with a thesis of we're going to add a platform to it, you have to understand how much cost that platform really is going to give to have, how expensive it is, and what that takes away from the profit you're buying. Because we buy businesses on a profit multiple. We talk about profit every day. We talk about profit all the time. Profit is really, really essential for us as a holding company. So you have to understand how much you're buying and then what you're actually getting after the platform cost. And that's really where we measure our group profitability, is after platform costs at the bottom line. Yeah.
Now, when you do this evaluation now, obviously every brand I take is going to be slightly different, and will have potentially slightly different costs depending on the nature of the product, let's say. Now, usually on a regular view, right, on brands, you have your CM1, CM2, CM3. Do you guys have a view at that level? Where do you operate on, in that regard? Like, is there a target that you guys are looking at in terms of optimization? Is it different per brand? Is there one operative model that you guys apply to each one of the brands? To all of them?
It's a really interesting kind of examination of our journey. I think when we started, we really tried to operate the brands very, I guess, uniquely. And over time, we've realized that actually our benefit comes from standardization. Coming back to this question of what are we here to do? Actually, what are we here to do is to actually, a lot of our business is built on kind of brilliant basics of doing the simple things well. And yeah, so we split our P&L into CM1, CM2, CM3 by brand. So we are managing every brand on those three levels, and we target the business on a CM3 level because we feel like that's the thing that we can control the most in terms of the brands themselves. And then under that, we basically map our resource, our platform resource, onto each brand, weighted by the amount of time people are spending on it, to understand where those brands are most profitable or not. Because the challenge is always we've got lots of people, and we want to be making sure they're spending their time most efficiently. But there are nuances in brands, and to a certain extent, a lot of the challenge of running a business like ours is you have to accept those nuances and sort of ignore them in order to be able to run the business effectively. And the business is already so complex that we have to push for simplicity all the time and as much as we can. So having that standardized view and really trying to measure every brand in the same way has really helped us understand what's working, what's not working for us, where we should be spending resource and where we shouldn't be, because it's just unified our language and it's unified our reporting, and it's actually made us able to see the whole business, where when we started it was actually very hard to see the whole business on a regular basis.
Do you, how do you feel, or at what stage do you guys are right now in terms of, like onboarding brands and bringing them to that system, the mothership system? Like how has it slowed down? Has it accelerated? How has it been, in that regard? Because I'm sure, obviously, having gone through all of the learning phases and getting now to a point where you go, right, we need to learn to know which bits are okay to ignore, or for now, what stage,
Yeah.
but then also these are the bits that are important, because there is so many levers that you can pull, and actually making sure that you focus, and especially when you're running a portfolio of brands, and you have a concentrated team, it can be easy for, some brands to be a little bit more needy than others, but also it's important as you onboard those, new brands into the portfolio.
I mean,
and bring
the answer to your question is we will never stop. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle, but I think I've been through a few cycles with the business where we've seen, I guess when we started, there was a kind of a growth cycle in terms of acquisitions. You buy some stuff, and then there's a kind of calming. You try and work out how to run it. Then you buy some more stuff, and then there's a calming. You work out how to run it, and you buy some more stuff. And we've had sort of three cycles. So when we first started, we bought a couple of brands, and then we raised some money. We bought three more brands. And then we waited about 18 months, we bought two more, and now we're back in a phase where we're kind of building the system again. And every time you buy a brand, you learn more about your system, you learn more about your DD processes, you also learn more about your transition processes, and you learn more about how to run all of these things at once. And so I think it goes through phases. And I think if you overextend at any one point, say if you buy way too many brands, which maybe we did in our middle phase where we bought three in quite quick succession, you have to acknowledge how much that's going to change your business and how much you then have to adapt. And I was listening to an interview the other day where someone talked about like the dark force of complexity in any business. Buying businesses is like, there's just this gargantuan wave of complexity that can come in, and everyone can get very overwhelmed. So taking some time to refocus on the system, almost redraw the map again and say, okay, well now how are we going to manage 7? How are we going to manage 10? How are we going to manage 15? Each of those things is just a different process, and over time you're iterating the core of that, which is the system, which is the metrics you manage to, what's the stuff that really matter. And I think we've kind of simplified that as much as we can, or we're working to simplify that as much as we can, but we're always getting better.
That's a very interesting, kind of like reflection, because I think especially people, like despite, no matter how much, I mean, people, there are always going to be a complexity. It's like in many ways, the necessary evil, as bad as it sounds, because it's, especially as you start growing, and managing all these different personalities, characters, trying to make it, that's the role, where probably us as leaders spend the most time on, is making sure that you are leveraging everybody's strengths. You try to mute those weaknesses and tend to ignore some of them, but being mindful of what you're doing, and especially when you're bringing, in your case, you're bringing a brand, but that brand comes with a personality and comes with ways of doing stuff. And, like there will be a transition, like into doing that, and managing all those different elements, will come with with its own, challenge, but also full of opportunities, because I'm sure, in that cross-pollination of brands and, of ways of doing things, the system will always be improving. I mean, we see it, ourselves, like Leaf is a very diverse team from different cultures and, and ways of life, and how every time we bring new team members, it's almost like and it's like adding a new ingredient to a tasty pot, and and creating a new umami flavor out of it. And it is about making sure that you keep the balance in those different ingredients that you're adding, and how do you maximize the impact in a positive sort of way.
Yeah, I think I think people challenges are kind of universal in businesses, right? Like, and I can pretend like my people challenges are different to yours because we're buying businesses, and sometimes they are, and you usually don't go through the kind of pit phase of kind of hiring a kind of bunch of people all at once who've worked together for a few years, which we have done occasionally. But my view on this is actually just clarity is the ultimate thing that you need. You talked about the kind of food analogy. From my perspective, it's great to add new flavors to the pot, but you've got to know what dish you're making, right? And you've got to know if you're making a beef stew or a vegan curry or whatever, whatever you want to make, right? And so knowing what you're trying to do, knowing who you are as a group and how you work, and creating real clarity about that helps when people come into that culture, because they know what they're there to do. And I would never pretend like we've done this super well, but throughout the business, I think actually simplicity, clarity, and kind of repetition and focus of message is basically the biggest job that I feel like we've done. And actually, I think it's been remarkable in terms of how it's helped our profitability. Because for us, when we started to really clarify what we were here to do, why we did it, how we did it, how we measured that, it really helped people understand what they were really there to deliver. And then suddenly performance improved because they weren't trying to do everything and be everything. They weren't trying to adapt all the time. They knew what they were there to do, and we had real clarity. And I think the same goes for kind of the culture as well.
Yeah, there is an episode on the bear, and I don't know if you've watched the bear, but
Love the
uh, the whole, there is an episode number 7 which is called Forks, and it's all about cleaning forks, and it's about the love for the craft, but actually understanding the role that each one of the elements play in the success of an enterprise. But probably most importantly, of the bear is that the same group of people that were running, a Greasy Spoon sandwich shop, go and become the same team running a fine dining Michelin star sort of restaurant. And I think having that clarity of vision, but also being able to make the most out of everybody and understanding the role that everybody plays within that vision, and especially when you're running a tight, very hard ship, like a pressure cooker sort of way, because ultimately, and I know probably for you guys the last couple of years more than ever, where there was this big transformation into profitability, into actually getting all the, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and making sure that you were transforming that. Because ultimately, it's not about, just the people, like Jim Collins talks about having, the right people on the bus first, then figure out where you sit them. But it's how do you build greatness, and keep that greatness in place, as things grow.
Dude, I wish I had the secret to that. I mean, I feel like it's something that we really aspire to, and I think we've got it right, and we've had challenges. I think definitely in the last 2 years we've really started to double down on believing in the people that we had on the bus, and kind of enabling them and giving the understanding of how they can make decisions. One of the challenges we had is because we started as a very tight group and we started to run the businesses. When we co-founded the business, I was kind of running a lot of campaigns. I was really in the business, and then that means I had a lot of knowledge. And so you end up creating a lot of time where you're doing a lot of the work and you're not necessarily empowering people. And even if you have great people, they're not delivering in the way that you want them to. So a huge challenge for us has actually been working out how to create the right environment where people can really maximize. and really benefit from the opportunities they have. Because the thing about the mothership, which we tell our new hires all the time, is like, if you want to get good at consumer goods, there's no better playground. We have 7 companies. You can kind of do whatever you want. And so it's like almost, how do we get out of the way, provide the right direction, and provide the right environment where they can grow and adapt and deliver, rather than us almost still wanting to be in the day to day and really trying to direct it. And I think it sounds silly, but almost allowing the fact that it's a complex business and it's very difficult, to allow you to understand that I shouldn't be making the decisions, because I can't understand. I'm now at a position where I can't understand every brand right to the detail. I should be working out how people in our CRM team can make great decisions for the CRM piece of that brand, and not get involved as much. Has sort of helped the bus stall less, I think, as we've moved forward.
Yeah, and that's a very good analogy. And I think when we talk about profitability, in the first half of this season, we were talking about sometimes the disconnection that lies between the top management, let's call it for lack of a better word, the operators, and the direction of travel, and also understanding what's possible and what's not possible, right? And how do you guys, running 7 different brands, having profitability as a core, objective, I guess, for lack of a better word, that is shared among the group. How do you make sure that, from the top management all the way to brand level, those objectives not only, remain aligned, but also that you're all speaking the same sort of language? Like, how do you make sure that, you're remaining, you have your stretch targets, but remain real to what's possible? And, having that conversation in a way that you empower the group and the brand level, to be their best, knowing that they're different, I guess.
I think this is an amazing, a great question and a hard challenge. I sort of see it as for us, we see this as a data problem, and we see it as a process problem. I think you guys at Leaf talk about this a lot, right? But data, there's a lot of data in e-commerce, and it's remarkably difficult to see it all at once and in one place. And a lot of people see things differently. So coming back to our earlier point about how we create the P&L, all those things, we create really clear understandings of what the data is that we want to see, what metrics we're building to, how we build forecasts from a kind of which metrics do we care about perspective. And then it's about how those numbers get disseminated throughout the business, how top down, how bottom up, who's in the room, and how we create a process whereby we reforecast probably once every 6 months, and that process involves essentially a bottom up process where we think about what the opportunities are, and a top down process, which is that kind of where do we need to go, and there's a negotiation there, but we just make sure that everyone's talking off the same hymn sheet when it comes to we've got a single source of truth that we work from, which is not easy, but is kind of what we're trying to do. And then after that forecast is delivered, how does that get disseminated even to the wider team? Because you'll have the forecast is being built, but maybe an operative example might be that you need to make sure that your warehouse team, because we own our warehouse up in Scotland, we have a UK warehouse that we own, and our whole warehouse operation needs to be aware of how that goes. And if you let that drop and the forecast exists over here and the warehouse team don't know, suddenly their resource planning is out and you can have a problem. So for me, it's about how you get the right data, how you all start talking about the same things, how you unify almost from a top-down level. I think that is very top-down. This is how we see success. This is how we measure it. And then how you create a process whereby the people who are on the ground can contribute clarity of what the opportunities are, and people who are kind of responsible at the board level for making sure the business moving forward can communicate that, and then how that information gets disseminated into the business. Does that make sense? I think that's
it makes a lot of sense. And the interesting bit is also getting a handle on the numbers, and on the KPIs, which ones matter, and actually which are levers that actually are meaningful, but also even to the point of the unit economics, right? And understanding how do you maximize those, and how do they actually play play a role. A lot of people, stay in that CM1, maybe going
Yeah.
into CM2, CM3. Like a lot of people might not go that deep because it's difficult, like, especially now with attribution and all those things. Like it's becoming, more and more imperatively difficult. People are expecting more and more ROAS without anything else
Yeah.
changing. Like they're just expecting like like a couple of more ads and this, and then suddenly, like you might
Yeah.
double ROAS or whatever, right? I mean, but it's having an understanding through and through of that contribution and that the
Yeah.
different elements to actually have.
And I think it's sort of there are two ways we think about this, right? Like I think there's a financial set of metrics where you understand you've got kind of revenue, CM1, CM2, CM3, EBITDA. There's a sort of we measure right down to cash contribution, right? And that full set of P&L metrics, and then there's a sort of the how metrics, like what are the activity metrics? And I maybe have a take on this, which is that I think there are 5 things that matter in e-commerce, right? There's product margin, so there's unit economics, but there's CAC, AOV, LTV, and cash conversion. And those 5 things from an activity perspective actually really helps us structure the business, because AOV is your middleman, right? So AOV matters from an LTV perspective because AOV is about what product people are buying, but also kind of there's a what product people buy, how they're buying, what their journey is. But it's also from a CAC perspective, how people come onto the business, to the site, how they buy, what they buy, how fast that site is. You can directly understand that your job as a marketer is to get as many customers as little money as possible, and you can really understand that from an LTV perspective, that's how you really affect your unit economics and profitability long term, because repeatable revenue is predictable, so you can base a lot more financial metrics off it. It's also defensible, right? And then you have to make sure that you're measuring your cash conversion so that you're not carrying so much stock that you can't continue to invest in growth. And you've got to make sure your margins are good enough that if those 3 things work, the CAC, AOV, LTV, you're going to make some money. And for me, I think those 5 metrics actually really help me simplify how I see the business from an activity perspective. And then when it comes to P&L, we've got those five metrics. But often when you're talking to someone, I find those easier basically because they're more immediate to people in their kind of day-to-day, which tools they're using to actually manage the business.
And
Yeah.
that is great, and I think those 5 elements that you spoke to like does drive the business, and especially, and I'm curious on that, especially with you guys, lifetime value. Probably there is going to be a lot of repeatability built into the business model, and there will be subscriptions, and even analyzing the value of those subscriptions and analyzing lifetime value. Oftentimes we find, and especially with subscription-driven businesses, there is an element of understanding, better that lifetime value and that component, because you're not, obviously you want to drive profitable acquisitions upfront and hopefully at least break even on that first transaction, but you're also optimizing towards that long-term relationship with your business, with your customer, right? And being able to nurture and understanding, that there is a lot more than that, just like that immediate kind of like, conversion ROAS at the beginning, but it's more about like
Yeah.
how does the contribution over time actually work?
I think actually if you start to speak about it in the right way, it actually forces customer centric thinking, right? The thing that wins in consumer is a really good understanding of the consumer, and consumers come back when they like something. And if you're selling something that they can consume, and you kind of set yourself up in that way, then your lifetime value is a measure not only on your ability to kind of get them to buy more, but actually their ability to want to buy more. And if you can understand how you can make them want to buy more and what they're looking for from the product, how they can actually see success from the product, and you really incentivize that team to understand that, it can create a really valuable piece where they're not just smashing emails. They're thinking about, okay, look, how do we maybe create a bundle here that actually, if they're taking this supplement, maybe they need these other things to make it better, or there are accessories we can sell around it that actually makes their lives easier. And I think that you're making it clear that actually, the profit center of any consumable business, any repeat revenue business, but I think most e-commerce businesses is lifetime value. Like that's your profit center, and your growth center is your acquisition funnel. Like acquisition costs are so expensive, it's pretty rare that you see people making 50-60% CM3 margin on first purchase these days. So if we acknowledge the game is hard, then lifetime value and average order value become really, really important. And in order to win there, you need to understand positioning, You need to understand, but you also need to understand how you create a great product for a
And
consumer.
yeah, and remove friction, really. I mean, in building that long-term
Absolutely.
relationship. I was recently speaking to the founder of Dashwater, and she was
Yeah.
talking how one of the things that they built into the flows of the user journey was allowing people to either skip, like or delay, a
Yeah.
subscription delivery, or even gifting that delivery to somebody else. And they
Nice.
realized that, like those were elements of delight in their relationship that they were building with customers, and the gifting bit, like allowing customers to be able to gift that delivery to somebody else. It was also kind of like part of acquisition because it was allowing them to kind of like bring network effects into the play, but even delaying the like kind of like the next delivery meant that they were not losing the client, but they were actually allowing them to do it, because otherwise they're them receiving it, then having to potentially returning them. There is a lot of hidden costs that people not necessarily think about.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've been doing a lot lately, speaking to customers, to some of the brands that we work with, is about understanding return and the impact of return. And despite the fact that us as a marketing partner can control returns, because that's more on the product level and all that, having an understanding of why it's happening, how you can control some of that, and even figuring out ways that you can impact in a good way, like the impact of those costs, because those are all hidden costs that will end up eating into your margin. Those are, you know, some, brands are probably gonna be more exposed to
I
returns
agree.
than not, but I think it's something super important to control.
Yeah, and I think this is why for me, it's very easy to just isolate an e-commerce business to sort of like CAC, It's just like people want more customers and they want to pay for them and they want to understand that first purchase order. And there are lots of hidden metrics and hidden areas of really how great e-commerce businesses and great consumer businesses run that are much more about, and this also comes to cash conversion. Like if people aren't measuring cash conversion cycles and not thinking about how much cash they're returning to their business, it's much harder for people to build a business that's sustainable in the long term. And what I was talking about earlier, like we really try to position ourselves for how we become a long-term partner to the businesses we buy, but actually how we create long-term value as a group. What do we want to get good at is something that's about going to the market. Candidly, we want to go to the market, we want to raise money. And a lot of how we go to the market is we talk about how we build defensible, valuable revenue and defensible, valuable profit. And that's so much more about the little things or the boring, unsexy stuff. It's much easier to do a post on Twitter about how many customers you acquired than how you've moved your cash conversion cycle from, 60 days to 50 days or whatever it might be. And I think actually that's where a lot of the gold mine and the operational scalability of e-commerce really sits. And what that's really, the thing that's really helped us is actually owning a lot of our funnel and owning our warehouse has really trained us much better to understand how to move stock quickly, how to understand what good stock positions look like, how to really optimize that fulfillment part, which actually that CM2 margin is often the biggest tranche of costs, to be as efficient as possible and to get products in the door and out the door as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading recently a quote from Charlie Munger that was saying that it's a lot easier to
Yeah.
cut cost and manage your own cost than making more money. And
Yes.
oftentimes people don't realize that it's not just about the quantity of, like top of funnel or, top of the line bit is actually what sits in the middle that gives you that bottom line number that you need to get to. And it's about understanding all those different implications and the impact that you can have. So simplicity, those five variables that you talked about earlier. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that, Lawrence, that before we break, that you think it's super important for brands out there to be looking, and that you will think that over the last 18 months have been of impact for you guys?
It's a great question. Simplicity, I think, is the heart of it. I'd like to add more, but it's how you think about simplicity, and I think in a radical way. I would say that if I come back to that, simplicity also means that when you go to the market and you think about all the new things you could do, generally that's not going to help your business. Most of the time, it's about looking at your business as is and either stripping back the things you don't really need and being really, really harsh with yourself about the things you really, really feel like you need, and understanding how to measure that in the simplest way you can to really understand where profitability is coming from. I would love, I think when I first came across this challenge, I felt like, we wanted to transform the business and make it really profitable. It felt like a really crazy and difficult thing. But actually often it's quite simple, right? We buy a product for this much, we sell it for more, and we hope that the costs give us enough profit to buy some more products. And really starting to measure that and really understanding what costs go into that equation, what costs you care about, what costs you don't. That I think is really the fundamentals of profitability, and understanding that the annoying thing about consumer is scaling fast is a cash problem. It's not just about customer acquisition; it's a cash problem. So understanding the rate of scale that you can do, especially if you're bootstrapping or you're kind of really trying to live off, live off the cash you get in. Understanding what the right level of growth is for you and how you balance that, massively important.
No, I really appreciate, Lauren. Thank you for your time today. I think there's a lot of nuggets of knowledge in today's chat. So thank you for your time today.
Sounds good.
And for everybody, thanks for joining us today. And really looking forward for the next episode. Lauren, thanks again, and wish you a great day. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.